Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back. Today's story originally featured on Madame Frightmare's channel, so if you haven't seen her before, please check out the link below. So today's story is called Don't Turn on the Lights, written by author Jojo.
I've never been the type who invested much thought into spiritual outlets. Things like ghosts and mediums never caught my interest. They all just seemed childish. I was raised Catholic and hated all the dressing up and going to church, so I think my refusal of the spiritual was a way for me to rebel. People were just looking for something to make them feel better about the afterlife, or maybe they wanted the responsibility of doing the right thing to be lifted from their shoulders. That's along the lines of how I used to think anyways. I got to think this way because, to be honest, I lived a fairly privileged life. Despite all the guff I gave my parents about the church, every other day of the week I was happy as could be. Nice home life with parents who loved each other and who never had money struggles. We weren't rich by any means, but as an adult, I know how lucky I was to never have to see them break down under financial pressure. Life wasn't so cut and dry as I grew up. Learning about the things the world could throw at you at any given moment served to humble me a great deal. I never watched my parents struggle with money, but watching my mother gripping with the loss of her husband was so painful. Of course I was sad. I loved my dad, but the look in my mother's eyes was light years away. That look in her eyes played a big role in making me more sympathetic towards those who believed in something in the beyond. As I grew older, I found that I was directionless. I didn't know what I wanted to do, or even who I wanted to be. My folks were such hard workers, with ambition sewn into their very fibers, but when I was greeted with that big, great world, I felt lost. Trying my hand in many career paths and hobbies, I just didn't feel a longing connection. Mom told me I would know when I found it, that there would be a spark. Days went on, and I would go on to vent to a close friend about trying to find where I belong. She had just gotten a pretty life-changing promotion. I asked her how she decided what she wanted to do and how she was doing it. That was the first time I had heard of Donovan Roosevelt. She exclaimed that he had told her what her true calling was. I laughed. How could I not? Poking fun that she went to a psychic. She brushed my attempt at humor off and responded that he wasn't a psychic. He just answered questions. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a business card and handed it to me. Said that if I was looking for direction, he could provide it. I stared at the address, and a building that wasn't too far away from my place. My friend smiled when I muttered under my breath, "Well, there's no harm in trying, I guess." If some guy in a tent with a crystal ball wanted $20 for me to throw some random information out, I might get something new to try out at least. Honestly, I was rather jealous of my friend's success, so if she found it because of Mr. Roosevelt, then maybe I could too. I tried to call the place to set up an appointment or get some information when my friend told me that all I had to do was show up. So that's exactly what I did. I sat outside the building for a while, surprised to find a fairly looking, normal house nestled in the suburbs. Holding the business card up, I checked and double-checked to make sure that I was in the right place. With a shrug, I turned my car off and stepped out. My nerves were definitely on edge, but I was already there, so no point in turning back. I could just say that I had the wrong address if need be. Cautiously, I rapped my knuckles against the wooden front door. The green paint that covered it was showing few signs of age.
Are you here for a reading?
A wispy voice called from the other side of the door. I was taken aback. The voice had surprising clarity given the obstacle between us. "Oh, yes," I began to respond. "I was gonna call, but my friend just said to show up." I continued, hoping that I wasn't intruding.
"Oh, it's no problem, dear."
He spoke again. His cadence was bizarre. It was like the words he wanted to use were floating around, and he had to pluck them from the air. The way he lingered on the edge of a word, waiting for the next one to arrive.
"The door is unlocked. Open it in 3 minutes.
He began to instruct. Floaty words, but a stern tone. A wispy voice, but a gravelly deep one as well. It was almost as if he was speaking contradictory to the way he spoke.
Come upstairs.
He continued to instruct.
First door. On the left. I will meet you there. And darling, when entering the room, shut your eyes and don't turn on the lights.
There was a moment of silence as I half expected a bizarre instructions to continue.
Do you understand?
He stuttered his words like he hadn't expected to have to say them. Oh, sorry. I snapped myself out of my previous assumption. Yes, I understand. After my words came out, I heard the creak from the other side of the door, as I assumed it would be Mr. Roosevelt moving away from it. Standing on the front porch, I stared at my phone, waiting for the minutes to tick by. It was so bright outside that I could hardly see the numbers. Sliding my finger down, I pressed the options button and turned my brightness up. Normally, it's blinding to me when it's up that high, but with the sun bearing down on me, it felt necessary. They say that time is relative, that your observation of time can skew how fast or how slow it passes. Standing on a stranger's porch, my observation of time made it move slower as molasses. 5:45, 5:46, 5:47. I reached forward and twisted the doorknob. As Roosevelt said the door was unlocked, it swung open with ease. Stepping inside, I was quickly hit with a wall of stale air and the smell of musky linen. It felt as though the place hadn't been touched in years, but nothing looked to be dirty or out of place as I headed up the stairs. With another turn of another doorknob, I shut my eyes and I entered the room I was instructed to. Only then did it dawn on me how stupid I was being, entering a stranger's house and doing just what they told me to.
Close the door. Quickly.
He spoke hastily, so I turned around and shut the door.
You may open your eyes and walk towards my voice.
It didn't make much difference when I opened my eyes. The room was the same heavy darkness that it was behind my eyelids. No source of light seemed to penetrate the room. I felt around with my arms in front of me in the direction I heard him speaking until I found a chair. Using my fingers to feel things out, I was able to navigate myself into the chair. My heart was fluttering as I felt the presence of a small wooden table before me. Absent-mindedly, I placed my phone on the table. It was like muscle memory after years of putting my phone on the nightstand by my bed.
No matter what you feel or hear, do not get up or turn on the lights.
Roosevelt spoke to me. His voice was mild comfort in the seemingly endless darkness. Okay, I understand, I replied, not wanting to make him have to repeat himself.
What knowledge do you desire?
His voice felt like it took a vacancy in the darkness around me. I couldn't tell if it was keeping it at bay or ushering it towards us. I want to find my purpose in life. I surprised myself by the way I worded my desire. Purpose felt like such a meaningful word for an empty ambition. I felt the skin on my right arm forming goosebumps. It was odd looking at my arm, but only seeing darkness. It was like it wasn't there. My body had become a phantom.
That's simple enough, dear.
He responded. Every time he talked, I could feel the wave of his words crash over me. They were a physical force in that room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but it wasn't for my nerves. I felt something solid brush against my skin. I turned to face it, but of course, I was met with more darkness.
Don't fret.
He chided, as though he knew the worrying surfacing in my head. I felt a similar solidarity press against my right arm, pressuring down my goosebumps. A small rattle came from the darkness. I thought of snakes threatened and ready to defend their territory as I became all too aware that something had surrounded me.
You dear.
He spoke like he was about to regale some ancient epic yet untold. The presence I felt came from all directions. It was getting closer to me, and started to feel like it was gaining a stronghold on my chest. More objects brushed against me, and the more it happened, the more I could make out the glossy texture. The smooth and dense fingers of darkness jested me with teasing prodding. I felt my phantom limbs begin to shake within the darkness, the rough table my hands rested on rubbing raw against my skin.
Are destined.
I became all too aware of the being that sat across the table from me. I knew his name, but not his face, or his figure, or his history. A complete enigma had invited me into his home and sat a few feet away from me. My urge to run conflicted with the crushing reality of what breaking Roosevelt's rules could potentially incur.
To become.
Within the silence, I came to realize that the odd cadence of his voice was caused by the very same rattle emitting from all around me. My chest was beating and I could feel small veins of sweat falling from my forehead.
Hey.
He began to speak. I could feel a heaviness, but it was a pressure caused by anticipation among my fear. He was just about to give me a direction. Give me something I could walk out of the house with and pursue. Then I felt it. The table my damp wrist rested on vibrated. Not from anything in the darkness, not from Mr. Roosevelt, but my phone. Before I could begin to move my hand to stop it, the screen with the brightness turned all the way up turned on the display of my notification. There was a moment where everything froze. Time is relative, and when observed, your perception of it can be altered. And at that moment, time was still. Across from me was Mr. Roosevelt. I could see him clear as day. His head hung slack over the back of the chair. Limbs were limp, pulling down a slouched posture. Mr. Roosevelt was a corpse. There was no mistaking it. His face had been ripped away, leaving dark traces of decay. His clothing was tattered with colors that had either faded or had been covered in a film of dirt. God, I wish that was all. Mr. Roosevelt was some dead psychic using his decaying body as a means of communication. No, Mr. Roosevelt was a host. From the side of his head, the protruding from the matted and dirty hair was a thick, dark tube. It extended into the darkness under the illumination of my blinding phone light. I became aware that the room was comprised mainly of this thing. The tube wriggled as it wrapped around the room over and over, filling up any space it could find. With the light from my phone bouncing off its slick, shiny body, I could see that the thing had manipulated its body to create a perfect path from the door to the table.
Oh dear.
Mr. Roosevelt. That thing spoke. I watched as its body quivered along with the spoken words. It was like a mile-long vocal cord vibrating to mimic the speech accompanied by a familiar rattle.
That was careless of you.
The thing spoke. The chair across from me whined under shifting weight. Mr. Roosevelt sat up, his decaying skin revealing thin, dark tendrils manipulating over his movements. He lifted his head towards me. I could see dozens of tiny, hair-like lines wriggling in place from his eyes.
You shouldn't have done that.
Quickly, I lifted up and I grabbed my phone. The chair crashed to the floor behind me. As I stood up, I could feel my head brush against the thing. Before I could pull away, I felt its body splinter into small tendrils that began lacing into my hair.
Don't fret.
The thing mocked. With its tendrils in my hair, I swore I could hear the words directly invade my thoughts. In desperation, I let my body go limp. The tendrils tugged at my hair and ripped chunks from my scalp. There was a stinging in the top of my head, but it was enough to free me from that thing's grip, and I quickly started running towards the door. I'm unsure why the thing was sluggish to react as I used my phone's screen to light my way. In no time, I found myself at the door, and with a swift twist, I pulled it out and exited the room. It was a short and hectic jaunt to the front door. I could feel the tendrils behind me giving chase, but unable to move swiftly.
Don't run from me.
The thing shouted behind me one last effort. Opening and closing the front door, I could hear the shrill rattle that shook the house behind me. I ran to my car, and without looking back, I started up and drove away. As I fled the scene, I continued looking in the mirror, looking at my hair where it had been grabbed, wondering if a tendril had someone kept in my hair like a parasite latching onto my scalp. I never found anything, but anytime I feel this odd sensation, I'm worried it somehow got into me, and it's wriggling around under my skin. I wonder what the thing was going to say if it planned to say anything at all. Either way, I guess I have found my path now. I just can't push it into someone else and expect my problems to be solved. One thing is for sure, I'm going to have to find a better paying job. My electric bill is definitely going up.